Hello and welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David takes a look at the story of Zaccheus and the divine disruption that comes when you search for Jesus. Let's listen.
Have you ever gotten lost before? I know, probably in the days before you had a GPS on your phone that was with you wherever you went. But think back to before that time. Did anyone else like me print out MapQuest directions so that I knew where I was going because I had a piece of paper that told me? And those worked great until you missed a turn. And then the paper would not recalculate for you. You would just have to circle back and try to figure out, okay, where did that street go? Where am I lost? Or think about when you were a child. Did you ever get lost as a kid? I can remember once that my parents took a youth group to a concert at the Tacoma Dome. That would be like our Spectrum Center. And they invited me along. It would have been my very first concert. And we got in and it was crowded, right? There were people everywhere. And my parents said, okay, we need to kind of walk in a single file line until we find our seats. And so David, just follow the person in front of you. So I did that. I looked at the person in front of me. I said, I know them. I'll follow them. But also, it was my first concert, so I'm looking around going, wow, look at all these people. This place is packed. This is so neat. Oh, wait, focus on the person in front of me. Walk, walk, walk. Oh, that is so neat. Of course, you can probably tell what happened, that eventually the person in front of me was no longer in our group. And I looked around and realized, oh, I don't know where our group is, and I don't know where my parents are. And then the lights went out for the concert. What does it feel like in that moment when you realize that you are lost? When your heart starts beating a bit faster, right? Maybe your palms get a little bit sweaty. Maybe your stomach just drops. It's not a good feeling to realize that you are lost. But I don't want you to only focus on that. I want you to also focus on how does it feel when you are found? The moment when you realize, oh, I'm not lost anymore. There's someone I recognize. There's my parents coming to get me, or there's a landmark that I know where I am now. The relief that you feel in that moment, you can feel it in your entire body. The joy that comes at knowing that you are found. That's how I felt when I finally found my parents again, surrounded by a cadre of security guards, that they found me and they were so excited, as was I. But, it's not just kids that can feel lost. Adults can be lost as well at times, and not in a physical sense, but you can feel lost kind of within yourself. And what does that feel like? It's probably those moments where you're just feeling a little bit directionless, a little aimless. You're wondering, I don't know what my purpose is right now. I feel lost. And sometimes that lasts just for a day. Sometimes that lasts for a season. Or you're trying to get your bearings. You're trying to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing right now? I'm a bit untethered. Well, that's the feeling that we want to explore today, that feeling of being lost, and then eventually, hopefully, being found. And we're going to study a scripture that's going to be familiar to a lot of you. It's the story of Zaccheus, right? Zaccheus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. I'm curious, when the last time it is that you studied this story? Have you studied it as an adult? Or was it when you were a child in Sunday school? This is one of the favorites that people study in Sunday school. But there's so much that we can learn as adults studying the story of Zaccheus, and particularly how he was lost, and then eventually how he was found. Our story begins in Luke chapter 19. We'll start with the first verse. We're told that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zaccheus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. So that's all the author has to tell you. And already the original readers of this story know that Zaccheus is the villain of this story. Zaccheus is the villain because he's a tax collector. And in this time period, tax collectors were very corrupt. Remember, the Jewish people were not a free people. They were under an oppressive government of Rome. And what Rome would do was very insidious. Rome would hired Jewish people to collect taxes from their own communities. How would you feel if your neighbor came to get your taxes and give it to an oppressive government? You would probably be pretty upset with that neighbor, right? Like, oh, why are you helping Rome and not your fellow Jewish neighbor? And not only that, but they would always skim a little bit off the top as well. They would say, sure, I'll give what Rome requires for a tax, but then I'm also going to take what I want. I'm going to take from you as well a little bit extra to pad my pockets. And Zaccheus did all of these things, but it was more than that. He was not just an ordinary tax collector. We're told in the scriptures he is the chief tax collector, which means he was in charge of all the tax collectors in that region. And not only is Zaccheus the chief tax collector, but we're told from the scriptures that he was rich. And I bet the people reading that were thinking, yeah, I know how you got rich. It's from my pockets that you got rich. It's from taking extra from me. That's how you got to where you are. Yes, Zaccheus is the villain of this story, but he is also on a quest. That's what we find out in the next verse. We're told Zaccheus was trying to see who Jesus was. Okay, stop there for a second. Why would the rich chief tax collector be trying to see who Jesus was? I mean, at this point in the story, people knew who Jesus was. They knew that Jesus was standing up for the poor and the oppressed in the society. And Zaccheus also knew who he was. He was someone who stole from his neighbors, who took more than what was required. I would think if Zaccheus heard that Jesus was coming to his town of Jericho, he would be locking himself inside his house, not going to go and see Jesus. So for a moment, I want you to put yourself in the mind of Zaccheus. What's his motivation? Why is he going to see Jesus? Well, what I think, and I think as we study this story, it'll prove this out, but I believe that Zaccheus realizes something is missing from his life. I think his heart is unsettled. He knows that there's more to life than simply the way that he has been living. So he goes to see Jesus. And the crowd, who absolutely despises Zaccheus, they don't let him even get a glimpse of Jesus passing by. The next verse says, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So the image I want you to get is of a crowd that's just boxing out Zaccheus, because Zaccheus is short. Now, normally, if you're in a crowd and someone is shorter than you, what do? You say, oh, why don't you come in front of me? Because I can still see over your head, and that way you'll have an unobstructed view. But not with this crowd. They see Zaccheus and they say, we want nothing to do with you. We don't want you to see Jesus. You just stay back there. And we don't care if you don't get to see him as he is walking by. Yes, the crowd has positioned themselves as a barrier to Zaccheus' quest to see Jesus. But Zaccheus is nothing if he's not resourceful. So the next verse says, so then he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. All right, here's a picture of a sycamore tree in Israel. I look at that and go, that seems pretty climbable, right? That's a pretty climbable tree. And I also realize that as an adult, it's been a very long time since I've climbed a tree. And that's a little bit sad to me. I loved climbing trees when I was a kid, when I was a boy. But I mean, when's the last time you saw an adult climbing a tree in your neighborhood? You probably have not seen that. But Zaccheus, he says, I'm still going to go climb that tree. And I don't care how foolish I look. I don't care if I've got a bit of a reputation to protect. I mean, I'm the chief tax collector after all. But I'm going to kind of look like a boy up in a tree. Because to me, it's worth it to look that way. Even if the crowd sees me and goes, oh, what are you doing, Zaccheus? It's worth it to me because I want to see Jesus. Now, at that moment, he probably thought that he was just going to be kind of in the background, right? He didn't think he was going to engage with Jesus. He was just curious. But Jesus was going to walk by, and he, from his vantage point in the tree, could just kind of see what all the fuss was about. Again, let's think about his motivation. Why did Zaccheus climb up that tree that day? What drove him up there? Was it a feeling of emptiness in his life that led him to search for something more? Did he realize that stealing from his own people, if you do that long enough, is going to leave you without friends and without a purpose? And perhaps the next question would be, what will Jesus think of him when he notices him in that tree? Well, actually, that's what the next verse tells us, is Jesus' reaction to Zaccheus. We are told when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, "Zaccheus, you might as well stay up there because I want nothing to do with you." Oh, wait, that's not the verse, is it? No, that's not actually the verse. And yet, if the crowd was writing it, that's probably exactly what they would write down. They would interpret the situation to say, oh, Jesus is this holy man. He wants nothing to do with that sinner. He wants nothing to do with that person who's been personally stealing from me and from our community. No, Jesus is probably going to just call him out and then walk on by. But what Jesus does say, well, that might be surprising to the crowd and maybe to us as well. The actual verse says, when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, "Zaccheus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." You see, whenever we try to exclude people, Jesus has a way of bringing them back into his presence. The crowd did not think that Zaccheus was worthy enough to even see Jesus as he walked by. They physically blocked him. But Jesus sees Zaccheus in that tree and chooses then to invite himself over to his house. It makes me wonder, as we apply this to our lives today, is who is being excluded right now that needs a similar invitation? I mean, maybe there's someone in our lives that we just can't think of actually inviting them to church. Maybe we just can't picture them being in this space. And yet, if we are followers of Jesus, they would be exactly the kind of people that Jesus would invite to church. Perhaps this should be our goal for this week. Your goal is to invite to church the person that you think would be least likely to actually accept that invitation. Because maybe they would be so shocked and so in awe that you've even invited them that God will start some work in that person's heart. Yes, Jesus' love is incredibly inclusive. And that means as Christians, our love must be incredibly inclusive as well. Zaccheus chooses to respond right away to the love that Jesus gives him. We're told in the next verse, so he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. And all who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Okay, so I've asked you to put yourselves in the mind and in the shoes of Zaccheus. Now, I want you to put yourself in the mind of the crowd who's just watched this whole scene take place. What are they feeling right now as they are grumbling about what they have witnessed? Part of me wonders if they are jealous, right? If they're jealous, going, well, Jesus, why aren't you coming to my house? You're going to his house? He would be the last person that I would think when you came into our hometown that you'd go to his house. I'm so much better than he is. Maybe there's some jealousy going on. Or perhaps also, maybe there's confusion. Maybe they think, oh, Jesus just doesn't know how bad he is. Jesus doesn't really know who Zaccheus is. And if he figures it out, oh, he's going to want nothing to do with him. If you put yourselves in the shoes of the crowd, what is their motivation? Well, the thing is that Jesus can see inside the human heart. And Jesus knows exactly how much of a sinner Zacchaeus really is. And it is because he is a sinner, not in spite of it, that Jesus is going over to be with Zacchaeus. You see, I believe from studying the Gospels and studying the way that Jesus interacts with people, that for Jesus, he believes the best way to change a human heart is by developing that personal relationship with that person. It is not through keeping others ostracized or in the role of the outsider. You see, Jesus knows who Zacchaeus is, and Jesus knows the ways that Zacchaeus has sinned and taken advantage of his fellow man through theft and through corruption. But Jesus plans to get through to him by intentionally spending time with him. It turns out that just that invitation of Jesus to be with Zacchaeus was enough to completely change his heart. Here's the next verse. It says, Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Zacchaeus probably thought that Jesus is going to want nothing to do with me and that I will never be a part of Jesus' presence because he knows what I've done. But just the willingness of Jesus to be in his presence, that's enough to make Zacchaeus do a complete 180 in his life. I mean, he gives away half of his possessions. And to anyone he defrauded, and you know the whole crowd's going, "That's me. It's me. He stole from me." Zacchaeus is saying, "I'm going to give you back 4 times as much as I took." We know this story. We're familiar with this story, and so perhaps what has happened here is not surprising, but it should be. It should be. I mean, why would Zacchaeus have such a change in his heart based off this one interaction with Jesus? Well, I think it comes back to his motivation. He realized that something was missing inside of him, that his life was incomplete, that there was a hollowness to the way that he had been living. And almost simultaneously, he realized that Jesus offered something different, that Jesus was offering him a way to wholeness and completeness in his life. And in the final verses of this story, we're told that then Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house, because he too," meaning Zacchaeus, and he's talking to the crowd here, "he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man," which is a title for Jesus, "came to seek out and to save the lost." So earlier, I asked you to remember that story of the Good Shepherd. That Good Shepherd who says, "I'm going to leave the 99 and I'm going to go after that one lost sheep." That was a parable. That was a teaching. And in this story is the way that Jesus is living out that teaching. Because Zacchaeus is that lost sheep. And he's saying to the crowd, "You'll be okay. You'll have your time. But right now, Zacchaeus needs me. And right now, I'm going after him because he is my lost sheep." And that has me wondering, okay, who are the lost of 2024? If we were to update this story for today, who would it be that we would consider lost? Is it still the tax collectors? Do we need to send Jesus the address of the IRS? Probably not. Probably not. Some might say that the lost is anybody that doesn't have a relationship with Jesus. And you might be able to make that case, although I think it would be hard to invite someone to church while also just calling them lost. So who are the lost? Well, I wonder if a better question is to ask, what parts of my heart are feeling lost right now? You know, what parts of me need to be found by Jesus? I think the heart of what Jesus is getting at here is that every one of us has some part of our lives that feels restless, that feels lost until it is found by Jesus. There is a longing inside every one of us that yearns to be found by God. There's a theologian back from the 4th century. His name was Augustine. He wrote the world's first autobiography. And in that, he shares a story of when he was a teenager and the feelings of restlessness that he experienced early in his life. One particular story that illustrated this is he says he and a couple of friends hopped a fence and they were in their neighbor's orchard and they saw a pear tree. And the pear tree was in full bloom and had abundant fruit. None of them were hungry. They were kind of bored. And so they stripped the tree of all the fruit, smashing it on the ground, just to destroy it. Years later, he was reflecting on that story as he was writing this biography. And he was wondering why. What was my inner motivation to do something like that? And what he realized, he says, I was restless. There was a restlessness in my life and in my heart that led to destruction. And what he believed is that it's not just me, but everyone on earth has that inner restlessness, this yearning for something more that can only be completely fulfilled when you are able to find God in your life and in your heart. He wrote his autobiography as a prayer. The entire book is a prayer to God. And in that book, he wrote these words. He says, "You have made us for yourself," talking to God, "and our hearts are restless until they can find rest in you." You see, we cannot see God with our eyes, but we can sense a need for God in our hearts. We have a place inside of us, a void that longs to be filled only by our Creator. We are lost, and we are yearning to be found. And so go back to Zaccheus for one more moment. Why did Zaccheus show up to look for Jesus that day? Because his heart was restless too. Something in him longed for more. Zaccheus longed for a purpose in his life that went far beyond enriching himself at the expense of his neighbors. And I think that what was true in Zaccheus' day and what was true in Augustine's day back in the 4th century is still true today in the 21st century as well. That there are a lot of restless hearts out there that can only find their rest, their comfort, their joy, and their abundance in Jesus Christ. I was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost, and that includes our hearts as well. Amen.
If you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook. This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.